Pardon me while I have a strange interlude.
There is nothing else. Life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on the omnibus of art.
Along the misty corridors of time, and in those corridors I see figures, strange figures.
Welcome back, my friends, to the AP Strange Show. I'm your host, AP Strange. This is my show, and before we get going, we have a word from today's sponsor. I have it written out here. Move over, 23andMe. It's time for 23 Skidoo, the only genealogical site that allows you to access your closest relationship to a member of an Illuminati bloodline. If you've always suspected that you might be related to somebody within the Illuminati, or that your bloodline is somehow tied in, tangentially part of that Bavarian sect, go to 23 Skidoo, and they will run your DNA, and they'll have an answer for you in no time at all. 23 Skidoo, check it out. So tonight on the show, this is going to be a fun one because I am talking with the author of Chapel Perilous, and we're entering the Chapel Perilous right now. The Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson. He is a musician, writer, artist, and podcast host. He has his own podcast and lots of other fun things. But Gabriel Kennedy, also known as Prop-Anon, welcome to the show, Gabe. How are you doing?
Matt, thank you for having me today, man. I feel great. It was good to be here, man.
Yeah, so I'm happy to connect with you because like I said before we recorded, I feel like we have mutual friends and have been kind of in similar orbits, but had never really connected before. So it's good to actually see your face on the screen, even if listeners can't see it, and hear your voice. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, like I said, man, it's good to be here.
Yeah. So before we really jump in with the book, I was kind of curious about your introduction to the world of Robert Anton Wilson, and kind of like how that influenced your art and your work in the world.
Yeah, sure. I first came across Illuminatus senior year of high school in the back of math class. The math teacher was not really able to hold the attention of a bunch of rowdy kids. A friend of mine who always read these ridiculously long books like Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses. And I was always amused. I was like, what are you reading? I was reading like that book, Please Kill Me, the oral history of punk rock and stuff like that.
Yeah.
A lot simpler sort of like sentences and stuff. And this guy was like a genius. And I was like, shit. And then one day he brought in Illuminatus trilogy, and I was intrigued by the cover. It was the Dell edition, the omnibus, like all three books together, and had the really cool pyramid, kind of translucent pyramid with outer space inside, and the dolphins jumping over the pyramid, and the kind of checkerboard pattern beneath everything, and it kind of looked like it was floating in some other dimension, and really tripped out cover. And I looked at the back of the cover, and it looked like a detective novel that seemed pretty interesting about, this organization called the Illuminati, which I'd never heard of before. And blew my mind because I was, incredulous, a skeptic as a kid even. And it was like, wait, you're saying that there's one organization that rules the world behind the scenes? Like, it doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
But that was like a young mind skepticism, looking at the world from a window instead of actually going out into the world and seeing how persuasive so many different arguments can be, interpretations of what reality is. You meet all types of wild people, right? But when I opened the cover and saw the first quote of the book of Illuminatus, it was a quote from Ishmael Reed's book, Mumbo Jumbo, and said something like, the history of the world is the history of warfare between secret societies, plural. And then that blew my mind again, real quick.
Yeah.
All within like 30 seconds, I was like, this book is great. What is this shit? And because, that quote then suggests it's a contradiction of, the singular Illuminati, right? But then that there's warfare going behind the scenes of different groups that we don't even see. And
Hmm.
I was like 17 or 18, and of course, raised by pop culture, so could knew a lot of different storylines, but this was a unique sort of storyline in and of itself. So uh that was it. That was the discovery. That summer I read the book, and it blew my mind as I thought it would. It had me confronting existential realities, challenged my ontological views and
Hmm.
cosmological views, theological views. I was born and raised, and my parents are from Ireland, so I grew up in uh, outside of New York City, went to Catholic school, had the fear of God like shamed into me, right? From all these psycho nuns. And so discovering Bob, like, and then continuing to read Bob, seeing that he had a similar upbringing with these like weirdo nuns, right? And that so when reading Illuminatus for the first time, him speaking about him and Bob Shea talking about the old ones, and Cthulhu and the gods that existed before these present gods, and how they're completely indifferent to mankind, and sometimes they just want to mess with mankind, and they'll drive people crazy just
Hmm.
just for existing. And yeah, that really challenged my mind. That was my first encounter with really like real psychological horror fiction too, because I'd
Hmm.
never read H.P. Lovecraft before that book. And of course, they're borrowing from that for that trope within Illuminatus. So, long
Yeah.
story short, this book, it did it for me. It broke open my mind. And I read it at such a pivotal time in my life. It was, right before going to college for the first time. And it, it set me on my own sort of track. Like Wilson became my, my tutor, like my mentor for
Yeah.
many books. And reading him, I would go into the library of the school that I was going to. Like a DJ would go into, record stores, and the DJ would dig through crates looking for that one record. I would go through every floor of the bookstore because Wilson got me interested in fucking everything again, and
Yeah.
and it was awesome. So yeah, it was a great moment of discovery, and he set me on a path to just to where it is today, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like that's got to be wild because you have to like learn what all the references are, you know. Because I came to it, I guess I said it before we recorded, but I came to the Illuminatus trilogy later in life. So by that point, I had read Crowley, I had read Lovecraft, I had read like some of the Lilly stuff. I kind of knew what things were being referenced in there. Um, and for me it was just like, oh, this is the book I always wished I would write someday. Like
Mhm.
it's a mix of all the things I'm just like nuts about. But it's kind of cool to have that as a springboard and then like go out and discover all these other voices, just like a treasure hunt in the library.
It pretty much was, man.
Yeah.
Like Bob was my QAnon. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. Um, well, he's like a gateway drug to all the weird in the world, I guess in that respect, if you read him young enough. I wonder how I
Completely.
would have turned out if I had discovered him sooner.
I mean, well, yeah. I guess there's many paths up the mountain, and when you get there,
Hmm.
you got to pitch a tent somewhere, man.
Right. Well, I mean, with your music, it's like you incorporate a lot of these kind of Discordian themes and everything into it too, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah. I'd say like yeah, my intersection with Discordianism, yeah, like was mostly through Wilson. So aspects of Discordianism, um, with the project Hell Eris, definitely.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I put out a really cool rock record, man, and with the group called Hell Eris. Yeah, so
yeah,
I spent a lot of time, doing a lot of hip hop music and stuff. It's Prop-Anon, and in that vein, it's a little bit Discordian stuff, but then it's just like just wanted to make hip hop music.
yeah, yeah. Because I feel like there's a lot of recording artists, especially within hip hop. I could be wrong about this. That kind of unironically use the Illuminati symbolism and stuff like that. Without the tongue in cheek so much, like some of them seem to really, really buy into it.
Hmm.
Or at least the fans do. Maybe I'm not really sure which it is, but
No,
um,
that's a super interesting thought. I mean, that sort of hip hop Illuminati thing really it's really popped off and like right after 2012 or around that time, I think. And it was weird. That was like another generation of the internet, right? Like of before, and it was before Pizzagate, right? And
yeah,
yeah, all these references, especially to like Jay-Z and Beyonce, and and then the putting up the pyramid symbol with like your eye and stuff like that. Like yeah, that's very interesting how that got looped into the mimetics of hip hop. The masonry symbology of it and stuff uh yeah, that's very, and it also happened in a time when like I think everything started getting called Illuminati, like
yeah,
that's Illuminati, and the phrase itself sort of took on its own like meaning, yeah, like another like a mutation of what the game that the cultural game that humans play when they like this game of telephone that we still all play with each other, like the rumor mill, right? Like that capacity for humans to spread rumors, right? And
yeah, right.
just hot takes without substantiating them, you know. So, um, yeah, but then what the notion of though like the Illuminati within being used within hip hop, it it was being used to reference basically what I think P. Diddy was doing, you know, and
Wow.
yeah, like and not just him, but like what his trial and downfall has exposed of the Abercrombie and Fitch CEO, who also was busted in the last like year for having these illicit parties or whatever. Um, and that's not why he was busted. He was busted for like, sex crimes and whatnot.
Right.
And that the whole Diddy escapade, Diddy was running wild for years within hip hop, you know,
Hmm.
and how long was he doing what he was doing, and what exactly was he doing besides just beating the hell out of a young woman, who he had stayed, that woman Cassie, who was with him
Right.
for many years, like and then before Diddy, this was something that came out, uh was all this thing about Africa Bambaataa, who
Hmm.
is this guy, is that he's the godfather of hip hop. I mean, he was, from my generation and stuff, like, Zulu Nation were the true school hip hop, the people that were keeping it, pure to the message of what it's supposed to be about. And then it comes out, and I grew up in New York and was friends with people in Zulu Nation, and they told me in 2013 that like Bam was on some greasy shit, like,
Hmm.
literally. I was like, what? What happened? So, and then it came out in 2016 that Africa Bambaataa was, received allegations of uh, basically raping young Puerto Rican and black men when they're like teenagers or whatever, and
Yeah.
this for the last number of years, now he's a YouTuber guy, this guy named Hassan Campbell. He was like this main voice of this is what happened, and this woman named uh Layla Wills, Layla Wills. She made a documentary about this, and then a man named TC Islam, who was an MC in the New York City drum and bass scene, which is what I was really kind of involved with when I was young, right? And
Yeah.
so that was like a legendary amazing like scene of like youth culture whatnot, and Bam TC Islam was the guy always on the mic, and was seen as cool as shit, right? And
Hmm.
he was obviously part of Zulu Nation, and he spoke out in this documentary about like what the nefarious things that Bam had been up to, and unfortunately he was murdered not long after recording that, and that fueled like a rumor mill that he was murdered in Atlanta, and it
Yeah.
just seemed like over some sad street shit, but there's always that question mark of like who knows exactly. So the point being that uh this kind of revelation about what was seen as like the pure true school thing, and then all these allegations about Russell Simmons, popping
Mhm.
off, and then he was Def Jam, and this was like hip hop was like the pure thing, like, and it's like, oh no, man, like this is like there was this stuff going on at the
Yeah.
beginning. Is this what you're telling me? So this all kind of, I think, by 2013, all these bubbling words, it just gets encapsulated in Illuminati. So hip hop Illuminati is in like referencing these sorts of shenanigans, you know,
Well,
and
yeah, and the structure that keeps it all hidden from public view. It's all behind the scenes. Stuff that people can't know about. And then if you have people speaking out and then you know winding up catching a bullet on the street, that doesn't help with the paranoia aspect of it. So um,
yeah, so it's interesting how that word lives on,
yeah.
you know.
Well, that is wild. I never considered any of that, but it makes a lot of sense. Because I mean, prior to me discovering Bob's work, I was, I've always been into like UFOs and monsters and ghosts and conspiracy theories to like a lesser degree. But like, as someone coming up in the '90s and looking on the internet, it's like all I ever found were really questionable sites talking about the Illuminati. And then I think Dan Brown had a hand in like popularizing it too
Mhm.
with the Da Vinci Code and stuff, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. Um, uh, or in the mainstream anyway, in the '90s at
Mhm.
the time. And but I was always curious, like what exactly this Illuminati thing is, um, and it always just seemed kind of. I mean, some of those YouTube videos got like downright silly. It's just like any example of a triangle in a photo, it would be like
Right.
circled to just. But you're right, there were a ton of those, like right around 2012, like that. Yeah, um, but yeah, I mean, it was great to actually end up reading, finding somebody like Robert Anton Wilson to like walk you through, because I mean, the Illuminati plays like a huge role. It's like a lifelong intellectual pursuit for him. He, he was still writing about them up till the end, and it's to have somebody as playful with it and as at the same time as serious uh, um, uh, to reference is pretty wild stuff. Yeah. So
Yeah, it was a fantastic teacher in that realm, you know.
yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to go back a little bit to what you said at the beginning with the Catholic upbringing, um,
Yeah.
because I guess that was kind of a part of Wilson's story that I didn't really know that well. Is just kind of his early confrontations with faith and with the faith he was raised in. Because I mean, I was kind of picturing the Penguin from the Blues Brothers. Some of the crazy nuns that
Oh, right.
you had to deal with, you know.
Yeah, not far off.
But I guess you had a similar experience growing up.
I did, yeah,
Yeah.
I did.
Um, so, uh, but I mean, there were a lot of things going on with Bob where uh, he seemed to have what you characterize in the book as a relentless optimism that balanced out a lot of like the trauma and the difficulties he had to deal with because suffering from polio as a kid, he wasn't
Mhm.
able to engage as much like with athletics or any of that other stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and it kind of made him dive headlong into books more, right? So um, the I feel like that that's the thing that I think most people kind of take away from Wilson that get really into him is sort of like a Zen optimism, despite the fact that things often suck. Would
Mhm.
you agree with that?
Oh, most definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, Wilson often wrote about it too. That, and I put in my book, Chapel Perilous: Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson. That uh, his optimism was not Pollyanna, pie in the sky. Let's just not pay attention to the leaking pipe. Let's just keep partying. You know, he didn't have enough money for that. But uh, he so that would ground someone to begin with, in order to just keep the lights on, even though he often described himself as, like, first being a rationalist in his kind of intellectual development, but looking at his life, like he lived as a romantic, right? Like in the
Hmm.
classic sense of the term, meaning like you know when Percy Shelley and Lord Byron sort of sense of the term, like making rash decisions at times, sometimes around money, not around paying people back so much as just saying, fuck it, let's go.
Right.
Like uh, him and Arlen and the family lived in, they moved like every 6 months for close to 20 years, right?
Yeah.
And Wilson often notes that basically, like, Arlen was his heiress, right? She was the random factor, right?
Hmm.
Her children describe her as having severe ADHD and an inability to kind of stay in one place for too long, uh, before something happened, and then they had to leave. So,
Yeah.
Bob was, totally. Let himself be completely smitten by the woman that he lived with, and finding new ways all the time to keep it hot, you know and
Right.
yeah, and that's real, man. Like, artists need that, right? And it's like, this is where Wilson is sort of like a voice for today, people seeking for wholesome this, wholesome that. Like, there's the story of Bob's wholesomeness there, right? Like, but like, it's he was, in touch with the third rail, right? Like, he was, there's this notion of, like, crazy wisdom, right? You danced in the taboo, right?
Hmm.
But did it in such a way that, being this underground, beginning his career as this underground journalist and developing into like this philosopher that he became, to constantly stay kind of at home in that unknown of, like, this area of, like, exploring these, and at the time, taboo is just speaking about, you could just call it like sexual education, really, and like gender
Yeah. Yeah.
education today, right? Like, what everything that's called DEI right now, like Bob was, part of this generation that was already exploring it, but he did it in such a way that was, like, kind of all, he was a search engine in and of himself. So, yeah, so just, he was someone that could always be returned back to, and just constantly sourced, and but also needs to be challenged as well. So writing the book was a nice process of kind of doing some of that and kind of grounding the writer in truly like a human life and
Yeah,
everything
I
that
mean,
entails.
I thought it was great because it doesn't deify him. He's a very human character with foibles and issues and stuff, but also just an extraordinary mind. I mean, talking about writing at the top of this, or I mean, reading, where you're talking about your friend reading like Finnegan's Wake and stuff, and talking about Bob reading a lot as a kid, it just kind of like fascinated me going through it, where I was like, man, this guy read a lot, and it just
Mhm.
kind of makes me sad because I feel like a lot of people don't really read these days, but but it's kind of great that he to read Bob, and I guess this kind of echoes what we were saying about Illuminatus. He requires at least like a passing familiarity with a lot of philosophical ideas and works of literature and writing that maybe aren't always accessible for people. But it was because he read a lot. Like he had a lot going on in his head. He read all the books,
Mhm.
um, and in particular, was drawn to a lot of outsider figures, which is perhaps like fitting considering that the title of your book includes the life and thought crimes of Robert Anton Wilson, because he seemed to be fascinated by thought criminals.
He was, that sort of. I mean, he was part of the counterculture,
Hmm.
that post World War II, 1960s counterculture, where they definitely, were intrigued with an aspect to outlaw this idea of outlaw culture
Hmm.
and yeah. And then but him as like I guess he kind of picked it up as sort of as a philosophical mission though to access an area of what's been called in a way stigmatized knowledge,
Hmm.
or maybe more appropriately um y- you know uh knowledge that's been pushed away, right? So for instance he was part of the kind of cultural zeitgeist talking about Aleister Crowley that
Hmm.
some argue began when Crowley's face appeared on the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club album cover from the Beatles, but when Wilson was writing about it, so just his ability to write the way that he did and to connect all these wild dots and to build this sort of like lattice that and his ability to write this out in such a way is what completely captured my attention, say reading Cosmic Trigger for the first time. And although Wilson was you know, an early great discovery. I mean, he wasn't the first author that I ever read. You know what I mean? Like I'd
Right,
read
right,
Henry
right.
Miller,
Yeah,
Ken Kesey, Nietzsche. Like, my mind was prepped already, like to be like, who is this guy? And then George Carlin too sort of prepped the groundwork, his sort of
yeah,
yearly HBO specials. And I cannot understate like the importance that that guy played on, a whole generation of people, thinking about what George Carlin is thinking about, like
right.
this sort of
But
educated.
that becomes a closed loop there too, because Carlin was influenced by Wilson. So
Yeah, and but that's what I wanted to make clear in this book though, was that they are related,
yeah,
you know, and because not a lot of people knew that at all, because Bob was not, he didn't always write like George Carlin's my friend,
right.
he didn't do that at all, and I saw him speak in 2001, and after the lecture in the Q&As, that was the question I decided to ask Bob. I was like, "Are you friends with George Carlin?" And he was like, "Yeah." Next question, so he he didn't he was into this sort of private notion of the things that he cared for, and they were friends though, as I illustrate in the book. Joseph Metheny, who is known as the creator of the Ong's hat. uh it's just the
The
creation,
ori- yeah, the
you
original
know
ARG. Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
original alternative reality game, like it says so much, and that he was Robert Anton Wilson's driver for a period of time, and that that Wilson took him to go see George Carlin completely, unannounced as a surprise, when Carlin was like he was already at a plateau, but yeah, and then Matheny, like watching Carlin and then thinking about his friend Bob, and then afterwards he's like, "Do you guys trade jokes?" And he was like, "Yeah, all the time." And that kind of blew Matheny's mind, and blew mine as well, So,
Yeah,
um,
me too. But it does make sense. It's like if you think about it, if you're familiar with Robert Anton Wilson's writing and Carlin's stand-up comedy, you're like, yeah, I could see that. Actually, that makes total sense. I don't know why I never saw it before. you know, that's like the revelation. It's like revealing an Illuminati link when you find something like that, and you know,
it feels
uh,
good though, right? It's like, oh shit, that makes total sense. And that's what I was trying to do with the book. Um, just answer questions that arose when I was reading him. I was most curious about, like, how many places did Wilson live, right? And
right,
over the course of his career, because in Cosmic Trigger, it's like this guy's moving a lot. And lo and behold, seeing that he moved even more, that was quite a discovery. And just that alone, like him being like a writer on the run, how do you contain all that information? And although like his books do have like some typos and misspellings of a few people's names, and mostly he's on point with a lot of stuff. He didn't, they didn't really edit his stuff. He handed in fresh copy, as the term goes, is that the right term? And like, and so him editing his own stuff, or Arling editing his stuff, and but him just writing all the time. How did he keep those wheels turning in every new place? Finding a place to write physically in every new place that you go. This is dogs walk around in a circle for minutes to find out where to, sit down. Like this is all
yeah,
a process of, as an artist, where do you land your studio to concentrate and to keep that level of depth, uh, you know, ha- they're that's why their college professors stay in their cloistered halls and their nice little, sweaters and stuff,
hmm
like, because it's good for you to stay cloistered to think about such things. But Wilson, through his own life decisions and life moving on life's terms, he carried with him this, he was a philosopher, right? As
hmm
Carlin was, like Carlin had more, uh, stability in terms of more housing stability than Wilson, like, yet Wilson still maintained this level of depth that I always still find fascinating. And um, it challenges me to, it's like, it's great. Just he is the sensei, right? Like, and
yeah, yeah.
you know,
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if he maybe thrived on the chaos. I know for myself, like sometimes when I'm going through dramatic, chaotic times, I'm more inspired, or like I need to blow off the steam, so it's like I write more. Or it's like you get too comfortable and maybe you can't. I don't know. Um,
that's a great point. Yeah,
yeah,
he once wrote to Greg Hill in the, I think it was in the mid 70s to late 70s, that uh, yeah, I have it in the book, that a quote that: "I used to think that I was happy despite the risks that I take, but it turns out it's because of the risks that I've taken that that I follow." Um, he was kind of, it's a great point, Matt. It sort of, maybe he thrived on that a little bit, because that was an extremely creative period of his life,
yeah,
uh, that time. And I think that the the murder of Luna and then Graham's like sort of onslaught of schizoaffective disorder, which happened shortly after Luna's death.
mhm,
Um, yeah, that switched things up for Bob and Arlen, and so maybe things weren't as quite, uh, moving so fast at breakneck speed, like meeting people, et cetera, et cetera. They kind of always had an open door policy. The
mhm,
the physicists who I interviewed for this book, Nick Herbert and Saul Paul Sarag, They didn't live far off from where Wilson and his family were at the time in Berkeley. And the first time Nick Herbert met Wilson was Saul Paul Sarag, just brought him to the house. They just strolled by, right?
Yeah.
And Nick Herbert's like, I was like shocked to see this guy just hanging out with his kids watching TV. I was like, when does this guy write? And
Yeah.
even then, within that chaos, if you will, like Wilson had a disciplined practice to wake up in the morning before everyone else and write for 4 hours during that time. And that's when he wrote. So, that's what it's about, like that, Nietzschean balance, if you will, between like the Dionysian and the Apollonian, right?
Hmm.
Uh, it's very easy to live the rock star life, especially more and more in, as time goes on. But like to have the develop your craft and to really stick to it, that's where the treasure lies. And that's what I was really impressed by with Wilson, reading him over the years, and then finally for this book, was his ability, his discipline within that chaos, if you will, um,
Yeah.
is admirable.
Yeah. And I mean, especially because uh, a lot of times I think the narrative often is with a struggling artist of any kind or a passionate artist that is taking risks, is that it's to the at the detriment of the family often. Like sometimes that seems to be the narrative, is that the family ends up suffering for it. um, but it's really important to Bob to maintain that, So it's like I feel like there are things he could have done that maybe would have been less risky, but would have involved less time with his family, like maybe,
Definitely.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Like, how does one pursue as intensely as possible, like a life of art, because one knows that to be an artist of any importance, you have to go all in, right? This
hmm,
is why artists are labeled as crazy. You see it in their eyes, the intensity of being completely dedicated to one pursuit will make anyone look a little crazy, right?
hmm,
And it's better that they're artists than internet Silicon Valley people, though. But
yeah,
and but so Wilson's dedication to this approach, while really, really, yes, heroically, and I wanted to make that clear in the book, that his daughter Christina uh, would often say um, that Wilson, Bob always showed up, right? Like,
yeah,
and uh, what he did not have was a lot of money after leaving Playboy. So the Wilson's financial story, the financial story of the Wilson family was 1959. Bob and Arlen are married. She already has two children, Alex and Christina, from a previous marriage. Graham is born in 59. Luna, Patricia, aka Luna, is born in 1961. They're a young family. But then for 5 years they're living with not a lot of money. Bob gets a job at Playboy in 1966, and for the next 5 years, he starts getting paid very well. As both Alex and Christina told me, they say this was the first time we ever had dental insurance, right? They were
yeah,
able to go to
yeah,
have doctor's visits on the regular, which was essential for obviously children. And but Bob decides, along with Arlen, after 5 years of this, is done with Illuminatus trilogy. Let's quit. I'll leave Playboy and go to Mexico and just kind of wait for Illuminatus to hit it big and get picked up as a movie, and we'll be
hmm,
living the high life. Um, and That's what they did. And that, of course, starts Bob's career really as a writer. The writer that we know and love is Robert Anton Wilson, because from that foolish decision to leave Playboy when he did, uh, basically out came the Cosmic Trigger series, but especially Cosmic Trigger Volume 1, which I
yeah,
think should be like considered, like, get that Penguin Classic stamp,
yeah,
because it really is a classic. And but as speaking, and I spoke to Wilson's living children a lot during the writing of this book, and Alex and Christina made it very clear that Bob made a very rash decision, although, can't change it. But what he left, leaving Playboy so soon, if he stayed a few more years, he would have received, I don't quite know the exact payoff, would have received some sort of pension later on in life, and some,
Yeah.
and, he made a decision, a nice romantic decision, and it reads well on paper. But as parents, they decided to pull their kids out of school, send them to Mexico, to another country, and they weren't getting regular doctors and dentist visits and et
Mhm.
cetera, all the things that young kids need. And not only that, like, this was like the 60s, 70s, the kids were exposed to adult life immediately. Like, the girls were
Yeah.
13 years old and they were going to like Mexican nightclubs, because that was the thing,
Right.
you know. Uh, uh, you know, Graham was doing acid at like 9 years old, So Bob, he he's dedicated, and he also is a doting father. He completely loves his family. He loves his wife. He bought Alex like a donkey, not a donkey, a pony, on
Mm.
like her like 11th birthday or something, or sooner than that. But then he had to sell it, you know, because they had no money, like a little later
Yeah.
on. But Christina's got a great memory of like a Christmas there where Bob built like this dollhouse for the kids. And like, when I hear the memories, I mean, these are beautiful, idyllic memories that it's so nice to share that with a parent. There are people who
Right.
have parents who had money, but they didn't do any of that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and so like, so that's the, when you're in it, when you're raised by it, you have the scars, right? We don't get out of here with scars from our upbringings, right? And
Mm.
but from a distance, we can appreciate each other's struggles in this life. And the Wilson family story is a beautiful story as well, and I had to kind of zero in on just mostly Bob for this, but like there's so many like ripples and so many wild stories. And and I'm not here to judge, to say, was Bob a good parent, bad parent? What he was though, like, I knew someone in college, his dad was like a big time, like, sort of painter. He was like a low, and he's in the greats, but like not well known. And I
Right.
saw his paintings. They're cool as shit. He taught at the college I went to and stuff. Total character. And but I knew the son. The son didn't turn out too well. And the 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 dad had in his studio, like, you can't be an artist and a parent at the same time, or something like that. And
Oh
that's like
wow.
where this kid grew up.
Yeah.
And so Bob didn't have that,
Yeah.
like,
Right.
and um so yeah, it's and again, I dip into this a little bit in the book, and just to kind of reflect that, the whole Wilson family was on that adventure together, and they
Yeah.
remain so.
Yeah. It's refreshing because, yeah, you're not like pulling any punches. You're not trying to hide stuff, but you're also, you're just laying it all out there for people to see. And I think overall, it's a very charming picture of a family that definitely cared for each other. It's like you can criticize. The reader can draw their own conclusions. You just lay it all out.
Mm.
Um, because I mean, I'm kind of accustomed to like separating artists from their work, like their personal lives from their work. Like I think of like Frank Zappa. Like I'm a huge Frank Zappa fan, but I'm like, man, his kids really just like didn't have the best life because he was on the road so much, and then when he was home, he was just hiding in his studio all the time. And it's like,
Mm.
you know, but and as a father myself, I'm just like, I don't know that I could really, you know, like take off and not see my kids for that much of the year. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool. Bob was ahead of the curve on what we nowadays call the work-life balance, I guess.
Yeah, very true.
uh,
Very true.
even if it wasn't as profitable as perhaps he would have liked. Um,
No. He was
but
a pioneer though in this though.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, but I guess he was maybe open to a lot of outside the box ways of approaching these things too. Like taking those risks didn't seem as crazy because, like I said, he was attracted to a lot of these outsider figures. Like I think of like Wilhelm Reich. He seemed to have like a long time fascination with Reich. Um, and I mean, where my mind goes with the thought crime thing is like the Orwell reference to thought crimes 1984. And Reich is kind of like one of those figures where the government literally took his books and burned them.
Mhm.
um, but it seemed like Reich was like a long time fascination for him. But not just him, but plenty of other writers that I guess you would call fringe. Like we had mentioned Crowley already, who wasn't as well known, um, at least in the states, with or taken seriously. Where nowadays, like pretty much anybody would know who he is if you mention Aleister Crowley. Um,
Mhm.
but but yeah, I mean it's a lot of these wild figures. And one of the names that came up that I've always been a little fascinated by because I feel like it comes up a lot in people as an influence to people in Bob's generation that you never hear about now is Korzybski and his general semantics. So I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that and the effect of Korzybski's work on Bob and his writing, because I feel like that's one of those like really obscure people that not a lot of people know about.
Yeah, his name has kind of gone down the memory hole, hasn't it?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, Alfred Korzybski was he so his book that really influenced Bob and a whole generation was called Science and Sanity, and it came out in 1933. And as you mentioned before the interview, like it's a huge doorstopper of a book, and
Yeah.
it's a book you want to carry with you, if you're facing down gunfire because it might stop a few bullets.
Yeah.
And Wilson, according to his story in his book Cosmic Trigger Volume 2, Down to Earth, where he provides autobiographical material of his early life in Brooklyn, said that he discovered Science and Sanity when he was 16 years old. So that was in 1948 in the stacks of New York Library. And he wrote that he read the book in a weekend, which really I'm still I put it in the biography as such. I had no counter evidence to suggest otherwise, but I still scratch my head and think like this guy read this book in a weekend. It's an 800-page book full of like calculus theories and formulas, and it's a very dense, and hyphenated words, very dense material. I read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in a weekend one time, like during college, and I thought I was pretty bright.
Yeah.
And like Wilson read that book. And so, and he went on to say much later that he, read the book every weekend, sorry, no, every year afterwards, which that makes complete sense because it's full of a lot of jargon. But if I'm to just quickly, briefly, describe what that 800-page book is about in one sentence, and Wilson made it very clear too, it's the statement, the map is not the territory. Um, this sort of statement, the understanding of the statement is that there's the world outside of us, and then there's the way that we describe the world. And if we think that the way that we describe the world completely describes, encapsulates the world outside of us, we're dumber than we even realize because uh, it's a sort of common sense understanding that humans have this capacity to constantly forget that the maps that we make for what we're surrounded by are not total uh, isomorphisms or matches to the world around us. They're approximations, and these approximations exist, these maps exist not just for cartographers, but in theories that we have, these grand, wonderful philosophical theories full of all this flowery language and polysyllabic descriptions of minutia of everything, like Proust's unlocking of a whole life in the one moment in time. And because like uh what Korzybski was getting at is that we just have to basically be aware when the our ideas of the world are putting us out of balance with how basically the process flow of reality, right? That's the simplest way to describe all this. And that question of reality was something that young Bob was wrestling with a lot at the age of 16 there in Brooklyn.
Hmm.
And he writes that that book sort of answered that question for him, or at least gave him a very satisfactory uh, answer to his, young philosophical like diatribes. And uh, he absolutely fell in love with it and the work of Korzybski. And so the influence on the generation, Bob's generation, was general semantics was like sort of like a hip, um, new, way to look at things. I don't think it was quite considered a philosophy at the time, like say logical positivism or anything like that. But what drove Korzybski was he saw what happened in World War One and saw some of the propaganda and other stuff and what drove people to become so violent with each other. He wanted to answer that question so humans wouldn't do that again. Like that was Korzybski's pursuit, like so humans
Yeah.
could become less violent, less
Mhm.
reactionary. And I mean, so very briefly, a to unpack the map is not the territory. Part of that is when we use the word is, what Korzybski called the is of identity, which he's sort of attacking the philosophical arguments of Aristotle and the notions of what Aristotle called the excluded middle. Um, Basically, Korzybski is getting at this is all very simple. We understand it, but we forget it all the time. When we ascribe one singular identity on a person, right, and that identity in the form of an adjective, like Terry. Terry is a jerk, right?
Yeah.
Isn't Terry
Right.
such a fucking jerk? You see Terry
Yeah.
every day. He's a jerk, you know. But we don't know, Terry's heroic, struggle that Wilson always sought to make clear in his work. Like Wilson was about laying down epics, right? He
Mhm.
understood laying down pessimistic stuff. That's cool. You want to say the pessimistic parts of human nature, but at the bottom of it, Bob was like, well, what, his optimism, it's what I equate to Viktor Frankl's tragic optimism, that people who know the score, right? You're very
Mhm.
familiar with the Leonard Cohen songs here and there. You know how
Yeah.
tragic shit can be, you know, but like you still got to try, man. Get out of bed, get outside, or do
Yeah.
something, man. Don't just fucking sit there. Like that's
Right.
that's the fucking message I get from Bob and so many other people, the counterculture within the counterculture. So many people. That's the message, right? Each one
Yeah.
teach one. And so, the way that uh, this all ties into Bob's interpretation and use of general semantics because the lessons that he learned in general semantics and there's other things too, like there's indexing. It's all ways to sort of really, to use the terminology of 9 years ago, like to not get triggered, right?
Yeah.
We have semantic reactions all the time to the words that people use, to the notion, okay, Terry's a jerk, but Terry has a really bad back injury, and you're catching
Mhm.
him at the same time every day when it's flaring up. You're not seeing Terry later on when he's a very gregarious, nice, and happy guy who's helping old ladies cross the road. You're not seeing that side of Terry yet.
Yeah.
And so many stories, literature and whatnot, are about like people learning the other sides of people, right? Like, and
Mhm.
uh, and the goal is to increase like compassion for each other's ordinary load, as Leonard Cohen would say,
Yeah.
and that we're all carrying it. And Wilson found that in like so many of the things that he encountered, like that message, like how do we help, you know, carry your load and help other people along the way. That's maybe a simplistic description of his intention, but I think it's there, and he found that in Korzybski as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, uh, I don't know if this makes sense, but I'll just ask it as a question. I guess it might be, to my mind anyway, it looks like general semantics laid the groundwork for maybe logic and Bob's kind of ontological view of everything he encountered, you know, and his way of expressing things and his way of viewing things.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to get that in the book. The level, the influences that he sort of like attached to really in his teenage years almost and early 20s. Um, discovering the work of Reich a few years later in his early 20s. He got the same, like being hit by a lightning bolt,
Hmm.
discovering these people that have something, some truth to reveal to him along his path of trying to figure out what the hell is going on, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And now he came to Crowley. I think it's in the book through Israel Regardie. Is
He
that right?
He did, yeah, yeah. In 1970, he discovered Aleister Crowley through his mentor. He described as a mentor, Alan Watts, the
Hmm.
British theologian and philosopher. And Alan Watts plays a very interesting role in Bob's, sort of early career. He drops in at like three very essential times in Bob's life. In the 19 early 60s, it's Alan Watts is the one that tells Bob about Tim Leary. And then he later on he tells Bob about Aleister Crowley, which through Israel Regardie in the form of Regardie's book, the Eye in the Triangle. And
Hmm.
Wilson reads that book, and yeah, the discovery happened in a conversation the two were having uh, at lunch, and Bob was telling Alan about how Illuminatus was going because it was in the middle of Bob and Bob Shea writing that book. And Alan Watts is like, "Oh, that reminds me. I almost forgot. I wanted to tell you about this book I've come across about this guy named this rascal named Aleister Crowley.
Hmm.
You should check it out." And Bob did, and just as he did with when he, first discovered Alan Watts's first book, The Way of Zen, he completely ingested it, and he, reached out to Israel Regardie in correspondence, and then over the years, the two developed a friendship through I try to put that in the book too. I have a
Yeah,
lot of letters between them, which was really nice to read. And yeah, so everyone, as you say, like so many people know Aleister Crowley these days, and I wonder how many people know Israel Gardi because his work was pivotal, and he first kind of came to fame or infamy when he published the sort of rituals of this form of Golden Dawn work that he had been involved with, and the Golden Dawn being sort of I'm not sure what you'd call it, an esoteric society. And since then, that time, Rigardi had developed a type of, I guess, therapy that fused the work of Wilhelm Reich, Carl Jung, and Aleister Crowley. And
mm,
Rigardi was working as a chiropractor as well. So,
yeah,
along with this guy, this is his alias, Christopher Hyatt. That's not his real name at the moment. I have it in the book. I forget his real name at the moment, but Christopher Hyatt, who wrote the book, well, who started New Falcon Press, uh, together, Rigardi and Hyatt developed sort of like a kind of self therapy, like body therapy. You just like make noises and you slap a pillow and stuff, but it's really pretty cool. And that
mm,
was based off of the work of Wilhelm Reich and as I said, Carl Jung and the magic of Aleister Crowley. So, long story short, Rigardi was a very knowledgeable uh, person in this realm. And like so many things, like Wilson was able to just kind of zero in and go to the source of the living uh writers and thinkers. Like he didn't just he went right to them and said, "What are you about? Tell me, I want to know, what is this?" And just as he did with Timothy Leary and and Alan Watts, and then Israel Regardie. And then earlier in his career with Norman Mailer, you really get the sense that Wilson was in the mix for a very long time with these people, right? And so discovering Crowley, though, set him off on the path that he describes as, Chapel Perilous in his book Cosmic Trigger, Volume One. And it's that period of time, from around 1971, well, specifically 1971 to maybe when he goes to Ireland, 1982 or somewhere in the late 70s. Bob is totally dedicated to the thelemic path. Um, he dives in deep. Another person that he becomes friends with, illustrating my previous point, is uh, McMurtry. Um,
Yep.
and McMurtry is and also his wife Phyllis McMurtry, now Sackler. Uh, they they were the ones that sort of reformulated the OTO and rescued it from chaos, if you will.
Hmm.
Crowley had been dead for a number of years, and so Bob befriended them. And when Bob was living in Berkeley, he was hanging out with like all these real intellectually interesting people, from quantum physicists to biologists to uh, McMurtry, who had opened his library of works of Aleister Crowley for him. And so Bob was just went so deep, so quick into the work of Crowley, and did, I think, such a great job pouring that into Cosmic Trigger along with his life story. I mean, again, it's a classic, right?
Hmm.
And but the major thing that Bob got from Crowley, I think, and I wonder what other magicians may get, and it's maybe the same thing, but Bob said, despite Crowley's, nefarious reputation, that Crowley was completely dedicated to, he thought that his path in life was to turn people on to their holy guardian angels. And
Hmm.
that was like his main mission, right? So that's what Bob takes away from Crowley, right? And
Yeah.
applying his own optimism. But I should say that, and again, I have this reflected in the book. It wasn't like so many things. Like Bob didn't just think like, oh yeah, this guy Crowley's great. He did a full rundown of the guy too. Like he at one point he wanted to write a very developed sort of biography of Crowley, but also speaking about other aspects of magical culture, and he wanted to link Crowley to like the beginning of like everything. He wanted to do like a sort of grand narrative. And that book never really came out. So I'm guessing that Bob sort of moved on. But at one point during that time that he's writing that book, he sends out Israel Regardie a letter, and he's asking Regardie, and he's like, was Crowley into vampirism? Because I'm coming across
Hmm.
something here, and if he is, I don't know if I like this shit, And so, Bob was always interrogating and questioning, like, his own, the things that he believed in, right? And but despite that, he did the recipe, if you will, follow the instructions that Crowley put forth. And like Graham Morrison has said, Morrison did the same thing, being very skeptical young person. He did this whatever magical ritual, and he saw what Crawley said you're going to see. He saw some lion-headed thing. So Bob, it was like he did the thing and he saw the results, and he was like, all right, I'm going to keep uh, doing this. And also there was another reason why Bob was dipping into magic as well, bringing it back to his early years. Again, when he's around 16, he reads another book that is about Carl Jung's a number of things, but gets into Carl Jung's theories of personality, of which there are four. There's the rational, the sensual, the intuitive, and one I can't quite remember at the moment. And so Wilson determined very early on that he was rational, a very rational sort of mind. So he wanted to develop the other three parts of his personality. And that's sort of fitting because we live in a world where maybe the people who've gotten very rich have just developed one part of the personality, and there's a whole lot of other parts that are, you know,
Mm.
they consider redundant and delete,
Yeah, right.
rational only, and so Wilson was a young searcher, like so many people who discovered his work, and as he continued on, that sort of was reflected in his movement through Thelema, and his meditations on the holy guardian angel, um, and what he thought did make it into print. And one place where it did was the fiction book that he wrote, Masks of the Illuminati, that was published in 1981 around.
Hmm.
And I mean, there's such a great discussion about sort of the ontological meaning of the holy guardian angel, right?
Hmm.
And how to briefly sort of unpack this notion. It's an idea that obviously Aleister Crowley did not invent. It's been part of sort of the Western esoteric discussion for years before then. It's supposed to be derived from a book written, I guess, by this person Abramelin the Mage from
Hmm.
way back in the day, but was discovered or rediscovered by I don't know if I think it's well Mathers. I don't quite remember his first name. Uh,
Well, yeah, S.L. McGregor Mathers was the one that translated it into English for the first time from
right.
French. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
He translated from French to English, and and of course, he claimed that he was in touch with all the big wigs on the other side. Um,
The adepts from the East. Yeah,
and was even willing to go to court for it. And some judge had to oversee this court battle between Mathers and Crowley, two magical
yeah.
maniacs trying to speak
I
in a
mean,
court
there
of
are some
law.
wild stories from those two. Like, I was reading at one point. I want to write about this at some point. I had this kind of idea about writing about like an Alice in Wonderland kind of version of the relationship between Crowley and Mathers. Because people forget about Mathers entirely for some reason. Like Crowley looms
Mhm.
so large that Mathers gets like obscured, but he was kind of the mentor there, that. But they would play chess, and Mathers would play chess against the gods, basically.
Mm.
So there would be nobody sitting in the other chair, but the gods would instruct him on their move. So he would be playing against Zeus, but he'd have to move the piece for the god. Like,
I, that's such a great illustration of reality tunnels,
yeah,
because in this reality tunnel, it's like a Mr. Show sketch,
yeah,
totally ridiculous. And but within that reality tunnel of taking the thelemic game rules as seriously as you can, well, beyond thelemic, the Western esoteric game rules, right? Um,
mhm,
that's an interesting exercise in developing your intuition or something,
yeah,
right?
right.
But that is a very funny image, a very, very funny image indeed, man. That's hilarious.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, because people talk about Crowley's exploits. I mean, there's a lot of really funny things that you can say about him and like things that he did. But Mathers was up there too. Pretty much all those Golden Dawn guys were. Uh, they all had their little quirks.
they did indeed. Thank
Yeah.
God they weren't billionaires, man.
Well, I mean, they were well off enough. I mean, most of them were upper class enough to be able to spend their time making robes and renting out a big hall so that they could do their ceremonies and everything. So,
Yeah, like
but
I'm still waiting for like the Aleister Crowley movie series, you know.
oh,
Uh,
maybe we should pitch it to somebody because I think both like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and the early days of Theosophy would both make like really amazing little mini series type things, because they're kind of similar in some ways, and there was some overlap. But that's kind
100%.
of my jam is like the uh, that whole 19th century occult period. I love that stuff. So
Oh yeah, I think that there's a lot of rich material that can be translated to the screen
Yeah,
from all
yeah.
that. And at the moment I just got hit, I think that it'd be amusing to see Piers Morgan as Aleister Crowley.
That's okay. Well, that's an image that's gonna keep popping up for me now that you said it.
I want to pitch it to him.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Do you
but
disown Aleister Crowley, sir?
yeah, they could make like the court drama of that one court case would be really great. Yeah.
Yeah, thinking on that, that's, again, yeah, there's two grown men having that, trying to, I guess, make sense of one reality tunnel in a, court of law, a completely other reality tunnel.
Right.
Uh, is highly
Right.
amusing. A lot of
Yes.
comedy. And but yeah, so Crowley he took it very seriously though. This whole notion of the knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel, and that is one, I guess, real positive thing that he took, I guess, stayed with him from his time with the Golden Dawn, and it wrote condensed versions of the book, for his friend Alan Bennett, I suppose. When he
Mhm.
wrote Liber Semek, and this was after Crowley had his own sort of epic journey with attaining knowledge and conversation with his HGA. Of course, he rented that house, that infamous house now in Bolskine, I suppose that's the way to say it. That Jimmy Page later bought, and I think some current rock musicians might be in there today. And he tried to do the whole thing according to how Abramelin the Mage set it out, which is like a whole 6 months sort of retreat, very
Mhm.
very cloistered. And, he tried twice and they were failures, Crowley. But then when he trekked across China in 1906, somehow on the back of a donkey, totally dehydrated, maybe eating opium, and, visualizing the temple in his mind, as he said, like so much so, he was so into it that the donkey fell off a small cliff and he didn't even notice at first till he was on the ground, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and so, like,
And miraculously, neither of them were injured. That's just like a
yes,
wild tale. Him and his donkey go over the edge of a cliff in China, in like the middle of nowhere. And they were both fine. Like he just is dazed. He wakes up out of his reverie and he's like, "What? What?"
his holy guardian angel was watching over both of them that day.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
That,
Yep.
well, at least the donkey wasn't injured.
Yeah.
Crowley, whatever, you know. But yeah, so Crowley, he was reciting the Bornless One invocation repeatedly
Mm,
in his head, and this being an important part of the equation. And um and so he made it a point uh for his system Thelema, that the first thing, that everything is geared towards the magician, all the early work to opening that door to have the knowledge and conversation with one's holy guardian angel. And again, cosmic trigger is a very beautiful telling of that story too, because
mhm.
Bob, as all great writers, he's tying in all these different storylines, and that's what makes the book so interesting. It's not just one storyline, and um, and so his own path with studying the Crowleyan curriculum, right, if you will, and it started with first of all, Bob realizes, as he said, he entered Chapel Perilous in a fine spring day in San Miguel Allende, Mexico, reading from Crowley's Book of Lies, where he comes across the passage where he, the secret message of Crowley lied within that book, the message that even Crowley didn't even know that he was able to translate. And it was basically, around sex magic, right?
Mm,
And utilizing sex magic to attain higher states of consciousness. And, Wilson goes on to get himself a pack of tarot cards. I'm guessing it was the Thoth deck, though I'm not totally sure. And this is all to work and develop one's intuition. Um, and kind of reading signals and people's micro expressions and telling
Hmm.
them this and that. And Bob got a lot out of this, man. And of course, it engaged his imagination to no end. And he himself, has this huge experience, which I guess is called his Holy Guardian Angel experience, on actually July 22nd, 1973. And he wakes up the next day on July 23rd, 1973, with a sort of message from the other realms, the other worlds. The one phrase as he awakes from sleep, wiping the dust from his eyes, and it's serious is very important. And
Yeah.
so he doesn't interpret that as the word serious, which the definition of the word serious is very important. He didn't think that. He believed, oh, yeah, let me check this new Kenneth Grant book that I have that didn't, came out not too long ago, came out in 1973 about, and think it's called The Magical Revival off the top of my head. And
Hmm.
within that book, he finds allusions to links between the dog star Sirius and the work of Aleister Crowley, and then even the Freemasons, and then Bob comes across the fact that the when on July 23rd, the Sirius star constellation is the brightest that it is all year, and that the Egyptians revered the star and they saw a lot in it. And so in the 70s, of course, this is another thread that's really percolating in the kind of counterculture, this sort of Egyptology uh, uh, discussion, if you will, right? This
Yeah.
discovery of old aliens, right? And um, you know, Bob later on, obviously, to Richard Metzger, and again, this is in my book. He says to Metzger, he's like, "Look, man, this shit is dated. All right, like I wrote this in the '70s.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
but I'm not going to shit on my book because there's still so much in it for people to discover." And there
Hmm.
really is, because it's the way that Bob handles this discussion that is still so relevant. And I wish, you know, more people do read the work of Bob. I hope my book does that to help them, have a ballast in this, current chaotic maelstrom of bullshit. And as
Hmm.
Cory Doctorow calls it, the enshittification of so much of the internet, and the enshittification of ways to sort of think about these things, where it gets to the point that people are embracing this notion of a CEO president who should be a monarch, and somehow that makes more sense than democracy. uh, you know, People are lost in the sauce.
Oh yeah.
They need to have these people who have thought about these things, and Wilson definitely thought about these things, and he what is great about the way that he thinks about the Holy Guardian Angel, it's reflected in that book, Masks of the Illuminati, where he sort of applies this, general semantic, non-Aristotelian approach to the ontological existence of, well, where, if the Holy Guardian Angel is real, what do you mean by that? In what sense is it real, right? And yeah, I put that in my book as well, like, because even the discussion of it is it's just really nice to think about. And it sort of showcases Wilson's ability to, spin all these plates, or all these, records at the same time,
Yeah.
being, a type of like intellectual DJ that he was, like
Hmm.
with all these samples that he's able to mix. And yeah, I mean, there's really a lot there, and I think that was the main thing that he got from Crowley at the end of the day, was, you know, in one sense, viewing magic as a type of yoga, and it's a yoga for one's heart, because the Holy
Yeah.
Guardian Angel experience is, as it's, someone like Lon Milo Duquette, uh, you know, very a scholar of the Western esoteric tradition, in conversation, talks about how that's the chakra that you're opening, is your
Mhm.
heart chakra. When you're doing this holy guardian angel work, like it will show you who you already are, to your fullest extent, both actively and receptively, both going out there and just going for it, and having the capacity of your heart to take the bows and arrows of haters,
Yeah.
but you know, yeah. So I think that's a very kind of a nice way to describe Wilson's application of the holy guardian angel stuff, because Crowley, you know, and that's the thing, like the message is played out in people's, according to their personalities, in different ways. Because Crowley, I guess he obviously spoke to his holy guardian angel, but he was a mischievous guy, let's just say,
Well, I think the trouble with that, from my own perspective, is the ego will really drag you down. So I think Bob's humbleness probably worked to his advantage, where he had the ability to be a little reserved in a way, where Crowley wanted it all right away.
Mhm.
And that's the thing is, people, I've brought this up before, that he was very young when he got into the Golden Dawn. He was a lot younger than a lot of the other people there, and
Mhm.
he moved through the grades quickly. So, for him to be performing the Abramelin, like buying a house for that purpose, um, the Boleskine was like a purchase. He just went. It wasn't even for sale. He just went and offered money, and they didn't want to sell, so he offered more money. Uh,
Mhm.
and bought the place. I mean, but yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with that ego point, where like keeping that, because I mean, when you're eventually later, Crowley would have to cross the abyss, and which involves dissolution of the ego on some level, you know.
Mhm.
So that's uh yeah. I mean, that's what makes the chapel so perilous, though, is there's pitfalls, and there's it's a place where you can't trust anything. And one thing that we haven't even really mentioned yet, which is kind of crazy, is that this whole knowledge and conversation with the guardian angel and entering the Chapel Perilous is uh, has a lot to do, perhaps everything to do, with the concept of synchronicity. And I think people that are fascinated by synchronicities that haven't read Cosmic Trigger absolutely need to read Cosmic Trigger, because uh, you can see like synchronicity as almost like, I see it almost like a communication system between Bob and his holy guardian angel, and maybe that's the way it works for a lot of people, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge, great area to unpack. This phenomenon that, yeah, was, I guess, the term was coined by Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli in
Mm,
their joint book, Synchronicity. Um, and breaking the word down, etymologically, I think it just kind of means like I mean, how Bob breaks down personally meaningful coincidences, right?
mhm,
And so it's like dream interpretation in a way. And this is what makes Bob so great too, because he's able to write about a synchronicities that gets the reader interested too, because sometimes there's nothing more boring than people trying to recount their dreams for you, or tell you about, did you know, like,
mhm,
I stubbed my toe right by the coffee. It was Bustillo, and then a Bustillo truck came by, and I had a Bustillo, and it's like, good for you, you know. And but this is what this dedication. This is what's funny, right? This is part of the thelemic path, I suppose. There is Crowley recommending that aspirants interpret every single signal, everything, as a direct communication from your holy guardian angel to you.
mhm,
Uh, so, and it's a two-stage process, right? So that kind of results in, first, complete gullibility. where you will open yourself to like, oh, this is all that's for me. Oh, way there in the distance, that noise of that chirping bird is some sort of message to me, you know.
Yeah.
And that's a very psychedelic uh, place to be, because if one is under heavy doses of psychedelics, it's sometimes very spontaneously one will get in that like it kind of a paranoid state or something where like I hear some distant truck, they're coming after me,
Yeah.
and like and it's perhaps best described by people like Hunter S. Thompson, that state of mind, but like where you have this gullibility and you have to look at the world through that through a period of time and then apply like this incredulous this ultimate skepticism
Hmm.
to everything that you just thought. So it's a very rationalistic sort of way to think about how you think, first off, right? But it was right up Bob's intellectual alley, and he did that. He sought to interpret all these signals in his environment as communications, and that all kind of came as like a package deal with the number 23, and then Sirius and the Illuminati. Like Bob, he was reading writers like Kenneth Grant who were already kind of like, making these claims that other, writers within the realm of Thelema say are really not, grounded in much reality. That even that Sirius that Crowley ever mentioned, Sirius as the blue star or whatnot, or the
Hmm.
silver star, excuse me, in the Argentum, in his AA magical order. But for Wilson at the time, that book had just come out, the Kenneth Grant book that were making these wild and interesting claims, and Kenneth Grant captured Wilson's imagination too, because Grant fused the imagery and the work of H.P. Lovecraft into this thelemic discussion, which he had not encountered yet either. And of course, Grant was a dedicated thelemic magician himself, just making some claims that have not been totally proven, I suppose. And uh, but Wilson read that, and that Grant's work became part of his sort of working program that he was working through those years, through Chapel Perilous from 71 to roughly 1977 when Cosmic Trigger is published. But yeah, it's nice reading how Bob constructs his reality tunnel to tell the story that he creates, and then it was really nice uh, studying the book and looking at all, kind of like first, just like Crowley recommended, like reading Bob's book in total gullibility, be like, wow, this is amazing. And then
Hmm.
applying ultimate skepticism to the book and seeing like, oh, okay, I see how he put this together. And but yeah, there's no question that he had like these huge enlightening sort of changes in his life during that time, and that Crowley's recommendation to interpret every signal as a direct communication uh, was a major part of that cosmic trigger story for some time. Uh, it could drive some people crazy though. So
Yeah, absolutely. As I think it was Regardi that had said early on that anyone attempting ritual magic should see a psychiatrist first and try to work out um, try to work out their issues before they delve into it, because if you don't go in with a level head, or at least uh, um, the ability to the ability to uh, essentially do the reality tunnel thing, and separate yourself from being too invested in something that's going to drive you mad. Um, if you're not emotionally stable enough, the synchronicities, and I mean, really, no matter how you look at it, it is kind of a magical endeavor, even if you don't believe in magic. Like, it's changing, it's consciousness shifting. It's for all intents and purpose, it's reality shifting when you have these things kind of revealed to you through experience. So yeah, definitely can drive you crazy if you're not in the right mindset for it. And I think
Yeah, I
Bob
mean,
like kind of questioned his sanity at points, right? Like, uh,
oh yeah, yeah. And maybe yeah, and maybe like a more sort of playful manner here and there.
yeah,
Um, like he had his work that, and that shouldn't be uh that should definitely be stated that um being an artist and being a magician work well together, right?
mhm,
Because you have an outlet for all this wild stuff that's going on that some people would just say in your head, right?
yeah, right, right,
But Arlen often told Bob sometimes too, like, that's just in your head, Bob. Like, and
yeah,
um, but he had such a great outlet for it. And but yeah, I mean, this phenomenon of synchronicity, though, not to poo-poo that at all, because he wasn't the one that invented that term. And um, Wilson alerted me to this notion of synchronicity. After reading Illuminatus for the first time, I had a number of synchronicities, and writing the book was just like, the dam was open on strange occurrences and synchronicities. Like that was kind of par for the course uh, during the years of writing the book. From the
mhm,
beginning throughout. You know, so yeah, that was a trip. Like I was like, seeing UFOs like I'd never seen before or since,
wow,
just being like, what the fuck? Um, yeah, from the very beginning where I had really just kind of zeroed in and really started writing the book proposal itself for the biography. Um, after it was the day before Halloween and leaving Target one night around 10 p.m., just over the tree line in the distance, there was an orange, low flying orange globe, bright, bright globe. And my girlfriend pointed it out to me, and I pulled over immediately and went to take out the camera, and it disappeared. Right. Um,
wow,
and uh, and there was and that set off this orange globe thing, set off like a little rabbit hole of discovery, because if YouTube and Google this orange globe is like a phenomenon. And I don't know if I put this in the book, but Christina told me that when she was a child, when they were living in Yellow Springs, she saw an orange globe floating in the forest that they lived in, right?
yeah,
And there have been UFO reports of that specific thing, like the low flying orange globes
yeah,
in the woods, and this was right above the tree line. So that was pretty fascinating. Um, and adding to that, um, I would keep seeing these sort of orange glowing orbs in a way. But then one night, and I was moving around like a lot. I saw that orange globe in Long Island, but since I'm now in Los Angeles, and one night driving with my girlfriend, saw a bunch of these orange flying globes like moving from the ocean side up through the hills, and I was like, what the fuck? And then as we drove a little closer and were able to see the people on the beach, they were setting off little lanterns on balloons,
yeah.
and it was
Chinese
flying.
lanterns. Yeah,
So, not quite sure what was what, but the fact of even seeing those things to begin with, writing about Robert Anton Wilson, who spent a lot of time obviously thinking about, and he himself, he's the first UFO that he saw was he was 18 years old.
mhm,
He writes, and he was out in the porch in Brooklyn. Wouldn't say it was a porch, out in the front steps in Brooklyn with his parents, and they all saw it. Him and his two parents saw a UFO in the sky, and he was totally like mind blown. And when he went looking for the newspaper stories in the Brooklyn Eagle the next day, like there was nothing about it,
mhm.
and his parents told him, "Don't mention this to anyone," right?
Yeah, don't
And
tell anybody
so
that.
you know
Yeah,
and yeah, and so this set off a lifelong fascination with him for these things that you're not supposed to be thinking about. And so of course, if you take the task to write about this fella, uh, it makes sense to encounter such things. And um, one of and then it was all throughout. I mean, on July 4th, when I first moved out here to LA, um, there was so many fireworks, right? They're amazing. But then this was, right before, this is around twilight, where it's still very, the sky was still bright, but like the nice purple, sky was coming in the distance, and you could really see the lights in the sky. And there were these lights just were flying in this strange sort of circular pattern. It was surrounded by fireworks, and I filmed it and I put it up on my Instagram. And I was like, what is this, man? What the fuck is this? But this whole discussion now is, all of this is happening around the same time that the Republican House and Senate, remember, they were fascinated with UFOs for a brief moment. And so it was all like mind fuck left and right, because UFOs were no longer cool to be talking about, because these ass clowns in the House
Yeah.
and Senate are fucking talking and renaming it UFO to UAPs or whatever, right? But no, but that was really, really an interesting thing. And then I read Adam Gorightly's book, Spooks, Kooks, and UFOs. I think that's the name of the book. And I got to
Sponsors,
speak with
spooks,
him.
and kooks. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and that was a great sort of skeptical history of the whole UFO movement and stuff like that. And I just thought it was really, really interesting. And the sort of core of that book being that how the UFO scene has been infiltrated from the beginning by military mind manipulation to sort of like create propaganda, and also see if these people are getting information from other spies. Like, it was a little hotbed of espionage, which I was never aware
Mhm.
of before, right? And so uh, tons of strange and interesting, occurrences during the writing of that book. And yeah, the most striking, I guess, was haunting, if you will, was um, when I was writing about Luna's murder. Um, uh, Bob never writes a whole lot about it. You don't learn a lot about the man who killed his daughter. It seemed like the family didn't really want to know too much about it. And so I did my research on the guy. And you know, when you're writing, you work on one thing and you put it aside as you're working on something else. So for like a few weeks, I was like, okay, I want to do some work on this guy, Alex LeBeau, right?
Mhm.
Maybe I'll look up one of these websites, People Finder or Tracker.com or something, where you pay some money. But I was waiting to get paid. I didn't have the money yet at that time to do it. And so I knew very little about this guy. But on the day I finally do it, I did it. I found out a whole bunch about this individual. And a week later, around, I realized that I did all this knowledge on this guy on his birthday, right?
Oh
And he
wow.
and he was dead, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought that was very interesting. Um, and Yeah, and so those are just two or three sort of areas where I did scratch my head and wonder, what sort of communications were going on. Like, but it was cool because the synchronicity was completely dialed into everything to do with the book. So
Yeah.
I don't even question the what's behind it at this point. It's just like, and that's continued throughout the whole process of the book. I had a a number of things, but I'll just leave it for that right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of nice to see. I think it's just a confirmation that you're doing things right. Reality coalesces in a way such that you have these complementary items like that. There's a symmetry to it.
For sure.
You're just like, get the info on this guy, and you're like, oh, he just died. Like, oh, it's his birthday today. Wow, wild. Um, yeah. How long were you working on the book?
Um, number of years. Specific, let's see, it was, I'd say definitely like hardcore, like 5 years. Just it was like all in stages. Like there was the constructing it, and then there was the editing it stage, which took a long time. Yeah, and because it went through the hands of like different editors and stuff too, and then back in my hands, and I did like a final sort of content edit as well, So much like Wilson, when he was editing Illuminatus with Dell, he was moving around a lot. Like I was moving around more than I'd ever moved in my life. Like that was perhaps the biggest synchronicity, I suppose, was
Yeah.
that COVID, when it hit, like so many people, it threw, the life of me and my girlfriend totally upside down. And, we moved to LA during that. And it- the interesting life that unfolded from that, like, basically living in like Airbnbs for 3 years because like it was impossible to get an apartment, which was so weird, you know.
Yeah.
And and so moving like every like few days was like really like it really does something with like attention and time and like and then pouring into the book whenever I could.
Mhm.
It was like that was sort of magical in and of itself, like this charge, and then working, driving like mostly as like a Lyft driver and like an Uber
Mhm.
driver and stuff, like um, being totally, I don't want to share, but being totally exhausted, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and just pushing it, man, like, because that was it. It was like you cannot. There's no safety net here, man. So
Mhm.
writing that book in that space, I think, I haven't even really had much time to reflect on that, but it does put a smile on my face. I'm very happy the book is out there, thankfully. And but I gained a real sympathy though and respect for what Wilson was able to do, what anyone is able to do if they're able to put consistent work out while, facing, everyday life challenges, man, so,
Yeah.
and it's quite magical. Yeah, it's quite magical experience.
Yeah, and I mean, when he was doing the moving around in the 70s and stuff, like he didn't even have the internet to communicate. Like that's wild to me that he had to pretty much like send a postcard to his publisher being like, well, this is the address you can reach me at now. I'll be there in a week. Like just
Yeah, and they
just to
would talk
keep
about
doing that. Like
he,
imagine how many manuscripts or copies of things just got lost in the mail or ended up at the wrong place.
right?
Like there's probably all kinds of Wilson material all over the place that just either ended up in the trash or just ended up on a shelf somewhere.
Could
They're
be.
probably hidden in estate sales somewhere.
Oh yeah, or buried in a desert somewhere, you
Right?
know.
Yeah, yeah. It's wild to think about. Um,
I mean, there's still
yeah,
books coming forth, so who knows, man?
yeah. It's like things get discovered all the time. I was cruising through your Substack and saw that you had like recently found this interview with him in like 1983 or something like that. So it was
Hmm.
pretty cool stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean, I had said this I think before we were recording, but it's commendable that you're able to. I mean, because you do have to. You're telling his story, and you have to keep moving, but you're able to concisely break down a lot of his influences and a lot of the things that he talks about and writes about in his books. Um, which I think is commendable because you're able to do it in a straightforward way and give kind of a synopsis, and it makes me want to go out and grab all the books that I haven't read and read those too, because I'm like, man, he had to. This dude just had to read all the stuff that Wilson read in order to be able to describe it adequately in the book, and then also all the stuff that Wilson wrote, and then compare them. So to do all that, like while you're moving house all over the country, is That's pretty wild.
Yeah, man. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. I do. Uh, yeah, that was it. Yeah, constantly kind of checking on his claims,
Right.
um, and having the obviously the aid of the internet to help with.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Internet
it was a
Archive
journey.
is a yeah. Internet Archive is an indispensable resource for a lot of these like older books that he might have been reading and stuff like that too. So, uh,
Although I have some of those older books, I mean, that was one of the things of being like a Wilson fan, obviously, or student was, you wanted to get. I have Science and Sanity
mhm,
behind me. I've carried much like DJs used to carry their records. Like there's like I have bookshelves that's absolutely essential that I have to take with me wherever I go for
yeah,
like almost 20 years now, right? And that was kind of a trip, like carrying out fucking huge boxes of books every 3 days, and we're packing up the trunk of the car.
yeah,
It's like we're moving, mad weight. Like, and uh, and what I will give myself props on was carrying all these archives that I accumulated that there no one has that archive yet, right? There's
mhm,
no, if there was a college and there might be a special collections archive place, there that's like something taken for granted for all these American writers. Norman Mailer has one, William Burroughs has one, Tim Leary has one. You can look it up on the internet and find these archives. Wilson doesn't have one, or at least he did not have one when I was writing this book. So I had to access all these other writers' archives, and that was work. That took a lot of work coordinating, and that's what I wanted as well, to just get as much of this as I could into this book, access as many of these correspondences as I could to really get the feel of the time and place, when Wilson was writing these things. And, the thing that the biggest discovery. So, I have like these letters between Bob and Greg Hill from the 70s, which I got from Adam Gorightly in the Discordian archives. I have, nearly 50 letters, the most consistent, over a period of 6 years, letters between Bob and a guy named Kurt Smith, that they had a
mhm,
correspondence going on in the 80s in Ireland. I got letters, as I said, between Bob and Israel Regardi, him and McMurtry. All of this took work to access these things because there was no, you can't, none of this stuff is on the Internet Archive, right?
mhm,
Like, and so, and, but yeah, discovering Bob's correspondence with Norman Mailer was what puts a smile on my face. Because first I was surprised that there was a correspondence, right?
mhm,
Um, and uh, and that was kept at the University of Texas. And what was good was it was both letters from, Bob to Norman, where a lot of these correspondences is just either, Bob to someone else or someone to them. Um, and I put that in the book. And, you know, I printed all this stuff out. So I have, I'm looking at them right now, like boxes of files. So that was the stuff I was carrying with me everywhere, finding storage
yeah, yeah,
facilities to store this stuff while moving around, and then moving around with this stuff. And I, but you know what? It gave me, just as actors have to prepare for roles if they're playing a biography of Robert Anton Wilson, like Daniel Day-Lewis prepared for playing Jerry Conlon in The Name of the Father, the Irish guy who gets
mhm,
arrested for a bombing he didn't do. Jerry, Daniel Day-Lewis stays in the prison overnight, to get the feel,
yeah,
like
yeah,
getting the feel of Bob would carry around. What was Bob carrying around everywhere he was going? All the manuscripts. He didn't have the computer. He had all these papers. He had
right,
typewriters, you know, that aspect, that part of the writer's life, getting in touch with that, all these things that like I really hope really distilled and soaked through the page, even though it was like a kind of, I wouldn't even say a quick run through, but like, moving through his life. And that, that was, I really wanted to, yes, concisely describe all these sort of influences and then his thoughts, um, while I am digesting how the fuck was he able to do this, while having to do something similar. And I just, yeah, I'm glad that it's hitting with people. I'm glad that, readers such as yourself are picking up on everything about it,
Y- Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and aside from his correspondences, that also just like people that he talked to, like familiar names that people will um, like him meeting Philip K. Dick and having a conversation about stuff, or having a friendship with, or at least a cordial relationship with Colin Wilson, which I didn't know about and thought was pretty great because I've always been a big Colin Wilson fan. Uh, and talk about a guy that champions outsiders. I mean, he wrote The Outsiders.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, it was funny too, like in their little exchanges, Colin Wilson kind of ribbing Bob a little bit
mhm.
about, Bob telling him what he got paid for appearances and, this and that. And, Colin being like, you're hardly getting anything, man. Like,
Yeah,
what are you doing? You know? And but it's so funny because they share such similar backgrounds, right? They both grew
yeah.
up, kind of working class poor, both young, kind of scientifically minded people, and then from their own grit and will developed full careers. The only difference is like Colin became fucking famous off of his first book and published,
Mhm.
I don't know, over 100 titles maybe, and
Yeah,
and Bob did it all on a shoestring for most of the rest of his career, So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that
I
was
mean,
great seeing that.
Colin Wilson was a much more like successful commercial writer, I guess.
Mm,
Commercially successful. But that's another dude. He must have been writing constantly, and another guy that seemed to have read everything. Yeah. So I've always been a fan. It's kind of nice to know that the two Wilsons had an appreciation for each other. Um,
definitely.
yeah, yeah. Um, all right. Well, we've been going for a little while now, but we could geek out about Wilson all day. But I did want to ask before we end here is uh, your personal relationship with Bob. You did meet him a couple times, right? And get to know
I
him through
did.
the Maybe Logic Academy.
I did. Yes.
Yeah.
The first time I met Bob was at the Disinfo conference, 2000. And it was in the basement area. So it was hosted at Hammerstein Ballroom. And, there's, downstairs, which is like the kind of chill zone. And there was a bar. And I saw this kind of stout looking fella in a khaki, blazer, and I was like, white hair and the red face, and I was like, oh shit, that's him. And I went specifically to this event, and not I never heard of really any of the other people on the panel. Never heard of Grant Morrison, Douglas Rushkoff, Genesis Peorage, Kenneth Anger. I knew about Joe Coleman. Um, and that was about it. And so I went there to see Bob talk, and then I went up to him at the bar, and he was like, "Oh, how you doing?" And and I had brought a copy of like a dog-eared copy of Illuminati's trilogy with me for him to sign, and he was quickly whisked away, uh, by a friend, and they were hanging out. And so I went back to upstairs to see the rest of the show or whatever. And then that was such an awesome event. And what was great about it too was like there was barely any security either, right? Like, so I just moseyed my way backstage. I was walking all over fucking Hammerstein Ballroom, man. Like I walked upstairs. When you go up Hammerstein Ballroom, there's actually another venue like on the upper stair areas of Hammerstein Ballroom. It's a really weird and interesting place, but there's a green room right off of the stage, and that was the green room where they placed everyone. So I was hanging out in there, and I you know, saw Bob chilling in the corner on the couch, not really in the corner, but on the couch and the corner, the pocket of the couch. And, the luminaries were surrounding, Grant Morrison was somewhere, you know,
Mhm.
drinking vodka and screaming like a wild Scottish beast. Are you serious? Was talking cyberpunk with whoever. Joe Coleman was hanging out with his beautiful wife. Like everyone was. It was a really cool scene.
Well,
A-
wasn't the
And
story that Morrison like dropped acid before he went on to speak, like right before or something like that?
yeah, he did. He took. I think. What was? I think he took. I think it was like a hash ball,
Oh, is that what
or
it was?
MDMA or something.
Yeah,
One or two of those things. And uh, yeah, I can't speak with. I don't know exactly what he took. But yeah, he was there, man, and he was awesome. That was my first discovery of Grant Morrison and Douglas Rushkoff, their work. And what was so fun was like what Richard Metzger was able to do and the Disinfo crew was this was like a huge intellectual party, right?
mhm,
Uh, and that was fantastic. And especially being in New York City, which was like afterwards, the after party was at the Chelsea Hotel, so like I was hanging out with like Greg Bishop, who, was he's a very interesting ufologist and whatnot. And it was just a bunch of people, just it was great. Right. And, but yeah, meeting Bob and having a conversation with him at that event, there he was smoking cigarettes, 3 feet away from me, and some like, jaded, cool, older New York City photographer guy was like sitting next to him, and I started the conversation with Bob, and then he told me he's like, oh, I get stage fright before I go on, and I was like in shock. I was like, how does this you get stage
yeah,
fright? Get out of town, Bob. He's like, that's why I smoke so many cigarettes. And I was like, oh, Bob, you know,
yeah,
and and then I got up the nerve to say, Bob, will you sign my copy of Illuminatus trilogy? And he was like, yeah, sure. And as I was handing it to him, this hand of this old jaded New York City, artist hand intercepted, my fucking book, and this
mhm,
photographer guy grabbed the book, as I was handing it to Bob, right? And he's like, he turns it over, he flips through the pages, and he's like, what's this about? And
yeah,
and I grab the book back and I'm like, it's about 800 pages. And I give the book to Bob, and Bob laughs and I made Bob laugh. And I was like, fuck yeah. And, he signed the book. I still have it. And it's so funny how he wrote, Hail Eris, right?
mhm,
But his handwriting, it looks like have fun as well,
yeah,
So,
yeah,
I just thought it was really great, right? I got to meet like a sort of a intellectual literary hero again at like a time of my life where I really it was good for me to do that. And uh m- and then Bob killed it that night at the Disinfo conference. And I write about all this in the book. I had a lot of
mhm,
fun writing about the Disinfo conference in the book because, it wasn't just him. Like, dude, this was like a wild group of people. Joe Coleman,
yeah,
during his talk, he ripped open his shirt and like pulled some lever, and all these fucking Roman candles like elevated up, and he lit them on fire and started shooting Roman candles at the crowd in Hammerstein Ballroom, you know. And then
yeah,
before Bob came on, and this is kudos to Metzger and his whole crew, like they really curated this event like really magically. Kembra Falver and performed, and she had sort of like this surf rock, punk rock thing, but she was also a performance artist, and so she was naked with her lady band. They were all naked. She was painted all in blue magenta. Her band was in red magenta. They killed it, and then they started the performance art part of the show where the ladies in her band, they all laid on top of each other, spread legs wide like yonis facing the crowd, and just like an ass pancake, just like one on top
right,
of the
right,
other.
right,
And then she took a big turkey baster of white paint, started slapping it everywhere. And like it was beautiful. You know what I mean? And like, and the crowd went wild. And like that's what she did. That was part of her art program. And she's comes out of the transgressive art movement of
yeah,
early 80s in New York City. And so but I'd never seen anything like that. And apparently neither did Bob, right? And he was totally befuddled in shock, and came out on stage after her, and he was like, I don't know how I can follow that. And you know, and yet he did, and
Yeah.
he did it all from sitting down in a chair. The crowd absolutely loved him. And it was like a really, really, again, pivotal event to go to see that. And then years later, I briefly met Bob, and not long after, at a talk he gave in San Francisco, December 4th, and that was the first time I saw that he was in a wheelchair. So that sort of like spooked me a little bit, because I was like, man, this guy's gonna live forever. What's he doing in a
Yeah.
wheelchair? And
Yeah.
um, and that's when I asked him at that event, did he know George Carlin? And he was like, next question. And uh,
Right.
and then in 2003, I made it a point to go to the premiere of Maybe Logic, The Lives and Ideas of Robert Anton Wilson, in a nice little theater in Santa Cruz. So that was a documentary that Lance Bauscher and Corey McClintock, I don't know if that's his first name, but they made about Wilson. And it's a really beautiful documentary. And yeah, I made it a point to be there for that. And that was a great event. And somehow I was able to land an interview with Bob the next day for July 24th, with the help of David J. Brown, who I met for the first time at that event. And I really enjoyed David J. Brown's book, Brainchild, as well as these interview books that he had done, Mavericks of the Mind. I mean, he's still pumping out, great interview books. And uh, he linked me with Bob. So on July 24th, 2003, I got an email from Mark at Cruzio.com, who was Bob's alias, giving me his address. And he's like, can you be here at like such and such a time? And I was like, yeah, no problem. So my mission then became finding where I was staying at a youth hostel, a really the weirdest youth hostel I'd ever stayed in my life. Like in Santa Cruz, they kicked people out who were paying money to be there from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. for whatever
Mm.
reason. And then there was a curfew at 10 p.m. where if you weren't in, you were locked out. So I actually was able to go to the premiere of that documentary with the help of some, I don't know, criminal guy who was like scamming his way through California. And he's like, I know how to get out of here and sneak back in. I was like, all right. And I did that. And so I figured out. And, but you were only allowed to stay in the youth hostel for 3 nights. So I landed the interview on the final day there. And then I left Santa Cruz after that. But yeah, and in many ways, that interview, you asked me earlier how long I was working on the book. Well, maybe it started then, right? With
Yeah.
because Wilson is the first interview about him. It's that's the seed, so to speak, and so many other things, man. Like a year later, that again, he started Maybe Logic Academy with Lance Bauscher, the director of that film, and then I was a sort of avid participant for nearly the whole time that Maybe Logic Academy was around. Um, and in that, Wilson taught a number of courses based on his books, and that was Bobby Campbell will attest to that. That's where I first met Bobby, was at Maybe Logic, as well as so many, like there was like a core group of people who are still like producing really awesome work. Steve Fly, shout out to Steve Fly, Toby Philpott, aka Bogus Magus, so many others. Eric Wagner just put out another book, and yeah, so that was a really nice intellectual experience. And that's really where I started to interrogate Wilson's work even deeper. And of course, in those classes, he pretty much provided like all this backstory to so many things, like one essay became like a whole class about, his perspective on politics, for instance. So, um, yeah, I got so much out of that. And then Bob passed away in January 2007. Before then, and put this in the book, where he was close to being evicted because here was this old legend, didn't have enough money to pay the rent, and he was near death almost. And the word went out, via Doug Rushkoff and Boing Boing, that Bob needed money. And so I was living in Brooklyn at the time. I gave what I could, got to play a part in that, helping Bob. And then I got to learn later on, like how affected he was by that, how like grateful he was by that. And I just think, I'm really happy that I got to write this book because, there's a lot of personal meaning in it, and then, but even further, to use this book as an opportunity to interrogate as much as I can, not really tear this guy apart, but, really examine a person's life. That that's a nice education in humanism, And so he died in
Yeah,
2007, and since then, his legend has grown.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's very clear how affecting his work was for you personally and your personal relationship to him. But it's still a very intellectually honest and all-encompassing look at him, which is kind of what you want in a biography. That's what I always want to see in a biography, is a level a level playing field with all of this stuff. But the warmth comes through as well. So I recommend any listeners, if you're curious about Raw, or if you think you know about Raw, check it out, because it's the only biography of of Wilson that exists at the moment, right? So
Hmm.
yeah,
First
so
one.
yep. Um, and it comes with plenty of other people's recommendations as well. If it, like, yeah, Matheny wrote like a little forward for it too, and yeah, I mean, it's it was a great read. A lot of stuff that I definitely didn't know, and it only and a lot of things for me to now track down. I mean, it's not like I've read every one of his books, but now I know about all of them a little more, and can figure out which ones I want to read. So um, it was a joy to read it, and I'm really glad that I finally got a copy and checked it out, because it was on my to buy list for like the longest time, and I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna get that and read it.
Nice.
So yeah,
Well, I'm glad you did, man.
yeah, yep. So is there any particular place online where people can buy it other than Amazon, or is it
Sure.
mostly an Amazon?
No, yeah, big news. It's moved beyond Amazon now.
Yeah.
So, one could buy it from Lulu Press, which is
Okay.
that's a good place to go. Um, that's if you're just buying it online, but it's now available in brick and mortar stores. So Barnes and Nobles, one could go there.
Oh
Your
yeah.
local
Cool.
bookstore. Yeah, yeah. And
And if they
also,
don't have it, just ask them to order it, because
yeah,
it needs to be on the shelves,
yes,
And
totally.
Jeff Bezos has enough money.
Yeah, 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 100%. I really, what I'm most excited about is getting the books into libraries. So I
Yeah.
recommend yourself and readers, yeah, listeners to your wonderful show to put a request in the libraries because,
Mhm.
I want this book to stand the test of time, so, and have it available for, yeah, for people who just want to discover it too, man. So yeah, it's available in every outlet now.
Okay, great, great. And if people want to follow you and your work online, I see that you're active on Substack, and you're using Instagram under Prop-Anon.
Yeah,
Is that right?
Instagram, that's more like pictures and fun
Okay.
stuff, like visually. Uh, yeah, Substack, Gabriel Patrick Kennedy, dot Substack. And my website for the book, chapelperilous.us. That's a really nice resource to head to.
Okay. Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on tonight, man. This was a lot of fun. Got a good opportunity to really dig into the life and thought crimes of Robert Anton Wilson, and geek out about it a little on the side. So I really appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate you writing the book.
Thank you for having me, Matt. I appreciated this, man.
Yeah, yeah, of course.